Hello everyone and welcome to my channel Body Mind Healing. My name is Maria Sanchez. I am a holistic health consultant, a family nurse practitioner, a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner, and a doctor in nursing practice. The case for today is human ego destruction. Is it true that the dark night of the soul destroys the ego? Let us first look at what is the dark night of the soul. This term originates from the Spanish mystic Saint John of the Cross, who in the 16th century described this experience as a necessary passage to purify the soul and bring it closer to union with the divine. Common characteristics of this process include a sense of emptiness, abandonment, or inner loneliness, loss of purpose or identity, breakdown of all beliefs, bonds, or projects, existential or spiritual crisis, a deep yearning for truth, authenticity, and connection. During the dark night of the soul, many inner structures collapse. Ideas, roles, or goals held by the ego lose their meaning, giving rise to a new perception of who we are. We begin to understand that we are not our thoughts or emotions, but rather consciousness, and that ego is merely a part of the human experience, not its entirety. The purpose of the dark night of the soul is to facilitate an inner rebirth. It leads us to confront and release the illusions built by the ego, creating a space for a more conscious life aligned with our inner truth. Though deeply painful, this phase enables us to transcend the limited identity we have adopted and pushes us toward a profound awakening. But this process is painful only because we cling to updated programs, resist letting go of beliefs that once made us feel secure, and hesitate to acknowledge our spiritual nature, our essence. Our spiritual lethargy keeps us from realizing that on the other side of this darkness and confusion, there is clarity, and that unawareness fills us with fear. The dark night of the soul is a deep spiritual journey or existential crisis, a stage of intense internal suffering, a process where we feel anguish, emptiness, restlessness, uncertainty, and loss of meaning. Everything that once offered us security, such as beliefs, relationships, identity, achievements, routines, etc., begins to fall apart. What used to work for us no longer does, but we resist this change and find ourselves trapped in a cloud of pain, distress, and grief. Far from being a typical depressive episode, going through the dark night of the soul is a spiritual transformation. It is a process where our soul stops identifying with lived mental programs and begins seeking something more authentic, profound, and aligned with its true essence, which is light and love. That is when we begin to question our life and processes at their roots. Living through this stage requires great focus and strength, so we do not fall for the stories the mind, the ego, creates when it feels threatened or forced out of its comfort zone. When the mind feels endangered, its survival strategy is to manipulate, to make up all kinds of narratives to paralyze us and prevent us from moving forward, to keep us in this apparent safe place, a state of numbness, ignorance, and absolute polarity. The dark night of the soul is an intense emotional state, a sensation of lacking purpose, meaning, or connection in life. But that existential emptiness and apathy is not boredom or loneliness, nor a punishment from the universe. It is a signal that something old within us is dying so something new can be born. This process is an earnest, sacred, and transcendental experience that pushes us to heal, release attachments, let go of what no longer serves a purpose in our lives, open ourselves to a higher vibrational frequency, transcend duality, move beyond the veils of oblivion, begin to see with the eyes of the soul, and walk the path toward a more authentic and fulfilled life, reconnecting with our true essence and allowing a purer connection with ourselves to emerge. Now let us examine what is the ego. The ego is the mental construct that gives us an individual identity. It is a vital part of our psychic structure. It is the part that says, I am, and helps us differentiate ourselves from others, make decisions, set boundaries, protect ourselves, express ourselves, and adapt to our environment. Thanks to the ego, we develop self-esteem, build a personal narrative, and function coherently in society. From a psychological perspective, the ego is an essential component of the psyche. It acts as a mediator between our internal impulses, emotions, and the demands of our external world. It gives us self-awareness, organizes our thoughts, and allows us to maintain a consistent sense of self. It helps us adapt to our surroundings, form bonds, and build a life story. However, from a spiritual perspective, the ego can become an illusion that limits our true nature. Many spiritual traditions say that the ego is a mental construct that makes us believe we are a separate I, disconnected from the whole. This identity feeds off achievements, labels, past suffering, aspirations, and external validation. The more we identify with this I, the more we suffer, because we believe everything that happens to the ego is who we truly are. When we fully identify with the ego, that is, with the mind, including our thoughts, emotions, achievements, fears, roles, or possessions, we lose sight of the fact that we are none of that. We are not the mind. We are something deeper. We are consciousness, the observer, the space in which the mind unfolds. If we stay in that egoic state, the ego becomes controlling, fearful, reactive, and dominant, causing suffering, comparison, attachment, need for validation, disconnection, etc. So the problem is not having an ego, but living unconsciously from it. The ego itself is not bad. It is a necessary tool for our human experience in this three-dimensional world. But if we are unaware of its influence, it becomes a barrier that distorts our perception of reality. When the ego becomes our sole source of identity, it limits us. We become enslaved by image, judgment, achievements, the past, and fear of our future. This over-identification with the ego is what spiritually invites us to transcend, not by denying our humanity, but by remembering that we are something deeper. Contrary to what dogmatics claim, the path of personal and spiritual growth is not about destroying the ego, but about educating it, recognizing it, observing it, integrating it. It is about putting the ego in service of consciousness rather than letting consciousness be subordinated to it. When the ego is educated with wisdom and love, it stops controlling us and becomes an ally in living with authenticity, balance, and depth. So even though we may not want to accept it, the ego does not die. It only transforms, if we work on it with awareness, of course. Fanatics insist that the ego must die to reach enlightenment. This idea, while poetic, is misleading. The ego cannot die because it is part of our psyche. The ego is illuminated by consciousness and becomes a useful tool when we stop identifying our essence with it. In fact, spiritual awakening is not about destroying the ego, but about understanding it, observing it, educating it, and preventing it from running us on autopilot. Ironically, the resistance to the ego, the desire to eliminate it, is a struggle that comes from the ego itself. But awakening is not a path of struggle, it is a path of integration. And we integrate the ego when we accept it as part of our humanity, without giving it control of our lives. The purpose of spiritual practices is not to eliminate the ego, but to transcend it. Through meditation, silence, self-inquiry, or contemplation, we can disidentify from the ego and experience consciousness as our natural state. From that space, the ego can still exist, but it no longer controls our decisions or reactions. Like it or not, living completely without ego is not possible in this human experience. As long as we have a body, a mind, and emotions, the ego will be part of our structure, part of our plan for this 3D experience. But as already mentioned, we can live with the ego instead of living from it. This means recognizing its practical functions without allowing it to define who we are. When we stop identifying with the ego, we realize that we can live with greater freedom, compassion, and clarity. That we no longer need to defend ourselves, compete, please, or justify ourselves, and that we can respond rather than react. This is true freedom, living from consciousness with the ego as an ally, not as a master. In conclusion, the dark night of the soul, which does not destroy the ego, it confronts, exposes, and transforms it. It awakens us to a deeper reality where we can observe the ego without being swept away by it. The transformation of the ego happens when we stop resisting it and start relating to it with conscious awareness. This process can be painful, yes, but it is also deeply liberating. It allows us to see who we are beyond the masks, fears, and stories we have told ourselves. Awakening is not about eliminating the ego. We already know we cannot do that, but about recognizing it, embracing it, and walking with it from a place of love and truth. May the inner peace we cultivate today expand and guide us always. Until next time.